I have been talking on a topic which is very important, particularly for the teaching learning, that is learning in constructivist perspective. Friends, if you remember that we started in our previous lecture discussing about that what learning is construction of knowledge, and in this current lecture I shall also be talking about learning as a transmission and reception of learning. So friends, as to understand what learning is as a construction of knowledge, we need to understand that, as we discussed in our previous lecture also, what kind of approaches the teacher can take as far as the constructivism is concerned. We also talked about that what kind of activities teacher can be taking as to make students think more and construct their own information. We also talked about that whenever a learner is involved in the constructivism, that means that the student would be not individual, rather it will be a process, it will be rather a social process, because constructivism means, as the Kant itself has elaborated, that human beings are not passive recipients of information. In fact, learners take their knowledge, connect to it previously assimilated knowledge and make it their own interpretation, as stated by Cheek in 1992. So from here what we understand is that individual constructivism also is a social process, because here the individual is having certain past information, and based upon that past information, the current information, whatever we are stating, that is assessed by the particular person, and after having assimilating that information with the previous existing knowledge, accordingly the interpretation is done, and then the knowledge is understood or taken up, accepted or rejected by the child. So from here what we understand is that whatever knowledge we are going to impart to the student or to the child, that has to be concrete, and students have to be given several opportunities to solve the problem based upon the concrete information as well as abstract information, and accordingly they should be able to unravel the concepts and knowledge, and each problem should be dealt in such a manner that the learner should become a builder or the creator of meaning and knowledge. So when we understand constructivism from the student's point of view, from the children's point of view, then we have to touch upon Piaget and Berner. Piaget and Berner, in the paradigm of constructivism, had stated that the children are not blank slate. That means we cannot go and simply write on their brain. So that means they do have certain learned behavior. If they have certain learned behavior, so it is for us to provide information based upon that learned behavior, and the child would be himself progressing as to discover further information. So knowledge in constructivism is constructed by the individual through knowledge discovery. So learning is interaction between the learner and the learning environment, and during this interaction prior knowledge is used as a basis to interpret and construct new understanding. As Confucius said, when he said, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. So from here what we gather is that the classroom learning has to be based upon activity learning. The students have to do as to understand further. These words of Confucius clearly states that constructivism means doing, means remembering more, understanding more, and that is based upon that is the base of knowledge for any individual. So the content to the as far as the model of teaching is concerned, the content has to be such that the student should be allowed to develop knowledge through an active construction process and not being the passive recipient of information. Even NCF 2005 favors that the role of student has to be of that of an active constructor of knowledge, and teacher's role has to be facilitator, guide, and the classroom atmosphere has to be very active, explorative, and teaching and assessment method should also be constructive. So what kind of assessment method would be in the constructivism approach? Here the students would be asked to apply the knowledge which they have gathered. They would be using the knowledge as to construct further. For example, the student who are studying physics and they understand the core of the earth, and they are asked to understand the core of the Jupiter based upon that, because they have got certain data of the gases which are available around Jupiter, and they have the data and the information of the core of the earth. So if they are able to interpret and understand and demonstrate as well as guide this particular information, that is the transmit the information in such a manner that they would be able to understand, investigate and inform about the environment of Jupiter based upon the information which they have of the Earth's inner core, because they have been able to apply certain physical certain principles of the physics, then we can say that yes, the knowledge has been applied. So constructivism has been done, and the students have also understood the basic principles related to the basic theorems related to the core of earth, which are covered in the physics. Now let us try to understand what learning is transmission and reception of knowledge. This is completely different from constructivism. So as the word itself says that learning is transmitted and reception of knowledge. Now when we talk about learning as a transmission, so there are going to be two poles, and one pole it will be transmitted, at another pole it will be received. Who is going to transmit? The knowledge will be transmitted by the teacher, and the student will be receiving the knowledge. And how the teacher is going to evaluate that whether the knowledge has been transmitted and received. Here the assessment would also be done by the teacher, and the teacher will be totally in control of not just information, knowledge, ideas and skills, but also would be in control of the assessment. So here the complete process of transmission would be governed by the teacher, and consciously she would be telling, demonstrating and guiding the students as to do something, to gather the information, to come down to the conclusion, and they would be proving the fact that whether they have received the information by replying or replying to the questions which would be put by the teacher. Now let us try to understand that what kind of assessment would be. As we understood that in constructivism, usually assessment should be of the questions which should be open-ended. In this case, we can have the close-ended questions also, because teacher just want to understand that whether the effective information has been retained by the students or not. So here even the questions which are close-ended, they are also very much welcome. Friends, when we talk about learning as a transmission and reception of knowledge, let us not forget that this is not just most traditional but also most predominant method of instruction which is done by most of the people. And I think this is the method which I am also doing currently, because I am transmitting and you are receiving. So here what is required is that the learner has to be very attentive. That means that the learner should be attentive, the learner should be able to listen, understand, imitate, repeat and apply that information. Dispersal of knowledge is needed over here, and that is continuum, because after having completed certain aspect, the teacher will be cautioning the students as to understand that whether knowledge has been dispersed in an appropriate manner or not. Here the teacher's job would be to supply the student with the certain body of knowledge, as well as to assess that whether that particular knowledge has been attained by the students in the predetermined order or not. So this is a difference between the learning as from the constructivist approach and learning from the transmitting and retaining approach. Now let us try to understand that what kind of tools and technologies can be used as to make it more comfortable for the students, or is it really required? Friends, it's not so that this kind of methodology is not required. Rather, it can be made more accessible and more easy by providing online courses, by providing radio lessons, because information has to be transmitted and there has to be way. What we can do is that we can have multiple methodologies and multiple sources and tools as to provide the information to the students. Through radio lessons, through online courses, through digital learning aids, knowledge can be transmitted as a major means of educational program in all distant mode of education system. So, these are the modern tools and technologies which can further be utilized as to transmit the knowledge as well as to see that whether the students are receiving the information or not. So, teachers through teaching and making activities, they will confirm that whether the knowledge has been transmitted or not. Because teacher is not just the dispenser of knowledge, but also the teacher is the fact giving as well as evaluator of that particular facts as well as learning. So, here the role of the teacher is very important. Here the knowledge will be transmitted by the teacher. So, teacher is going to be at the center and the student will be at the receiving end, and the facts, information, concepts, ideas, skills, whatever is being transmitted, whether they are purposeful, whether they are goal oriented, whether they involve explanation, demonstration, guidance, suggestions, directions, what kind of activities are to be taken up, all these things would be decided by the teachers. In fact, it is also dependent upon students' concentration, attention and interest. So, usually it is seen that the students who score well, they are the one who are attentive in the class, they are the one who are interested in the lessons, they are the one who are concentrating in the class. So, students get mastery just by being attentive and by remembering again and again through repetition and drill. So, this knowledge involves the concentration of the student as well as repetition by the student of that particular information, so that that information is retained as well as utilized by the student whenever that is being asked. Friends, whenever we say that this is a kind of an educational system, we have to understand that in the education system, this kind of learning is very much important, because without this, we cannot talk about critical thinking. If the information is not available, then the critical thinking cannot be generated. So, this is the first step of learning which is very much important, and this is the one which is most cost effective and can reach the maximum number of students. So, being the most cost effective approach to the learning as well as capable of reaching to the maximum number of people, this makes this approach very student friendly. I wouldn't say learning friendly, but yes, student friendly, but most of it teachers friendly, because teachers follow a well designed objective. They have a lesson plan which they decide that whether the interactive teaching learning sessions will be there. They decide that what kind of evaluation, whether it will be formative or the other one. So, probability of success in achieving the goal is maximum because the teachers are at the center, and they also understand that what is expected, what kind of learning outcome is expected from the students. So, these were the merits of this particular approach. What are the demerits? The demerits of this approach is that here the students are accepted as the individuals who have no knowledge, and they remain very passive. So, there is no scope for students to contribute in the teaching learning sessions. Now, let us try to understand that what are the characteristics of a good teacher, particularly when we talk about this approach. One, the teacher has to be very good at communication skill. Being good at communication skill means that the teacher should be able to utilize audiovisual, multimedia to reach the students, and the communication has to be of such level and such words which are to be learned by the student as well as understandable to the student. So, the communication skill would involve one thing, that the kind of language which is required, that has to be followed. Secondly, the language has to be of the level of the student, so students can understand that what learning is going on. So, teaching learning process here would involve appropriate use of language as well as the language which is understandable, and of course the writing on the blackboard is involved, as well as the subjects which are taught in a very structured manner. Here the teacher, apart from being a good communicator, also need to be an excellent learner. What does excellent listener? Excellent listener means that the teacher who is not listening to what students are communicating, what problems the students have, how much they have gathered, and how the other information has to be communicated, then naturally the purpose will fail. So the teacher has to be a very good listener, because teaching here is again not the one-way communication, but the two-way communication only, because teacher has to assess also after every learning outcome that whether the information is reaching the children or not, and it has to be guaranteed that whether the children to assess that whether the children have learned, they should be allowed to speak. So listening ability of the teacher is also at the center as far as this particular approach is concerned. Then there is knowledge of and interest in the subject which one teaches. The teacher who have interest in the subject of teaching, they have to understand and recognize that that the subject has to be presented to the students in a very interesting manner, and that can only be done if the teacher herself is having interest in the subject of teaching. So this is usually very much visible in the class, and the students are able to understand that whether teacher is interested in the subject and the class. So that can be assessed by the student, and that also have an impact on the teaching learning which goes on in the class. So this is also one of a very important aspect which is required, that is the teacher having interest in the subject which one is teaching. Another aspect is the teacher should be able to make good relationship with the students, because teaching learning involves human beings. The students are also humans and the teachers are also humans, and everybody has just like every other human being, we also have, as a teacher also we have certain strengths and weaknesses, and we also have certain learning inabilities. So this has to be understood, accepted, and accordingly students also need to be accepted by the teachers as far as their strengths and weaknesses is concerned, as far as their learning inabilities is concerned. Only then teacher would become good empathizer, would be able to connect with the students, and will have the positive attitude, which is very much important as far as the inclusiveness of the students is concerned in the class. This ability usually helps the teachers to communicate better, to have the good responses from the students, as well as revise at a better manner, because if the students feel that the teacher is with them, the teacher is empathizing with them, then naturally they become more active in the class, they become more interested in the class. Another important aspect which is required by the teacher is that the teacher should be friendly, as well as having the personality which should be very positive as far as the children are concerned. The children should feel comfortable. If the children feel comfortable with the teacher and they respect the teacher for the knowledge which he or she is having, then naturally there will be more exchange of information in a positive manner. So this is one of a prominent duty of the teacher, as to facilitate students learning, that the teacher has to have the personality which is approachable, which is positive, and the teacher has to keep on providing the helping hands to the students so that their learning improve, as well as shouldn't be looking down upon the students. And the school environment should be very friendly as far as students is concerned, and the teacher should be sustaining the interest of the students. If the teacher has to sustain the interest of the students, then the teacher has to connect on the personal level also, as to enable children to approach her and express their problem before her without any hesitation. Another important aspect of the teacher which is required as far as this particular approach is concerned, that is preparation for the daily work and organizing. Lesson planning is very important. Without lesson plan, the classroom cannot be designed, the classroom experience cannot be designed. In fact, the evaluation also needs to be designed and assigned to the children. So continuous preparation and improvement of those classroom lectures, or we can say the lesson planning, that is at the center as far as the teacher's role is concerned, or the teacher's attitude is concerned. These are the tasks which help in reaching students educationally, facilitating their learning, understanding their learning inabilities, as well as planning suitable solutions. So, these can only be achieved through practices, and practice on the part of the teacher usually help her to become the better teacher. We usually say that we can always become the better person. Similarly, we also say that we can always become the better teacher. Another important aspect which the teacher needs to have in her personality is that having strong professional moral stability, because generally it is seen that as far as values are concerned, the students generally take the values either from their home or from the teacher. So, it is very important that the values which are at the center of that profession, that is teaching profession, and the conduct which is expected of a teacher should always be there, because teachers are usually model for the students. Apart from that, the teacher has to be very good at organizing learning community. That means she should be able to support and nourish the environment in the class in such a manner that the students become good learners. The teachers can share the information in the class, can share the stories in the class, can have the community involved as to share the experiences or the information with the students. So, that way the teacher has to provide maximum learning exposure to the students, and for that even the community can also be involved, and the other resources can also be used as to provide the learning community in her class. Then the teacher has to be a model personality with principles. As we said, the teacher is a model to the children. So, that also means that whatever student have the expectation of the teacher as far as her behavior is concerned, that has to be up to the mark, but the desire or the expectation of the teacher also have to vary from one child to another, because all children are not same, because it has been found in the research that if the teachers have very high expectation from the students, then the students are not able to express much. But if they have the optimal expectation from the each students, then the children really become more explorative as far as information and knowledge is concerned, and they also want to be more learn more to fulfill the expectation of the teacher. So, teacher should have expectation from the students, but the expectations have to be different from one student to another, and they have to be of a appropriate level. So, friends, I have talked about two topics in the series of lectures. Once we talked about that what constructivism is and how constructivism is different from the other kind of learning which requires reception and transmission of knowledge. We also understood in today's lecture that whenever the knowledge is being transmitted by the teacher and received by the students, this is responsibility of the teacher as to control the transmission as well as reception of knowledge. And the classroom environment also has to be decided by the teacher. We also discussed in current lecture that apart from controlling the transmission and reception, teacher also has to control her own persona and behavior in the class, because that also have a very important impact on the students. We also try to unravel that how learning has to be acquired by the children. If the learning has to be acquired by the students, this requires that the students should have attention, and again maintaining students' attention, making them listen, making them imitate, making them repeat, making them apply. By these kind of activities, teacher can always make them better listener and better learner. So, dispersion of knowledge needs on the continuum complete involvement of the children also. So, here also teaching learning is not one way process, it is a two way process. The teacher's job is to inform to the students, to convey to the students, as well as assure that whatever has been conveyed, whatever information, knowledge, concept has been conveyed, that has been received by the students. and the knowledge is of the predetermined order. That is why we talked about having the lesson plan in the class, which is very important. Of course, in comparison to constructivism, here the teacher will be at the center. In constructivism, the students were at the center. Here the advantage is that the teacher has access to other tools and technologies also, which he or she can use, like the radio lessons or the online courses or the digital learning aids. They can also be utilized for aiding in their learning. So knowledge transmission can be improved further by utilizing certain tools and technologies. And most importantly, that whenever teacher is teaching, she has to ensure that knowledge is being transmitted. For that, the responsibility of the teacher is not that of just a dispenser of knowledge or the information, but also of the evaluator of knowledge. So here, whenever the assessment will be done, the assessment will be done by the teacher in more regular model. Right? The assessment cannot be done at the end of the lesson, rather it has to be continuum, it has to be continued assessment. So here the knowledge transmission will also be controlled, assessed and ensured by the students, so that learning is purposeful and goal oriented. So friends, on this note, I would like to finish off the second series of this particular lecture. I shall be joining you to further discuss the details on this particular topic only again. Namaskar, Jai Hind. Thanks a lot for being with me and listening to me. Thank you again.